Happy Sunday night, everybody. I am your host, Wes, for Conservatism on Tap, and we've got John here. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, doing really good. Wes, how are you doing? You
Uh,
had a busy week.
Dude, it has been an awesome week, and I'm so excited for this show because we get to just kind of like talk about it and relax. Me here in the studio, you in a bar, apparently. I love that background. That's great.
It'll be a new one every week until I get this garage all situated.
Oh, that's unbelievable. I love it. And you got the high definition going and all that stuff, so that's fun. I love it. It's great.
On our way up.
But so we've got a lot to talk about. The first thing I got to ask you is, being conservatism on tap. What are you drinking tonight? What do you got?
So I have got a Virginia local beer again. It's from Center of the Universe. I don't know if you can see that, but it's called Pocahontas.
Yeah,
So Center of the Universe is off of I-95 going towards DC, and they do again. So when I was on my way like with Hardywood, that was
yeah,
some of the more powerful beers. They had a lot of flavor. This one is an IPA, right? And for IPAs, I have just not been a fan. They are usually too hoppy, which means that they're too bitter.
yeah,
When I brewed my own beer, I usually threw all my hops in at the very last minute just for the aromatics, but not for the bitterness.
yeah,
This is an IPA that does not leave you hanging.
yeah.
It is not overly bitter at the end. It is a smooth finish, and that's hard to get, in my opinion, when you brew an IPA. So it is really
Dude,
good. Pocahontas
yeah.
from Center of the Universe.
No, you sold me that on that. I got some 30A, which is brewed down the street from where I live. So that's
Nice.
always one of my favorites. So nice light beer, great for summer. We're batting down here because of the hurricanes coming and all that. I think
Yeah.
Marco is the name that they're going with. So like it's coming, man. So we're hanging tight here. But that's great. So let's get into this week because honestly, I think this is like the best week that we've ever had with the project. I mean, we've been doing this for a little while, and just started doing these videos and the live sessions and all that stuff because we started writing essays, and then we switched over to this. And
Yep.
man, the interviews that we had. So bringing up a picture of these two guys. I mean, this was just awesome. Is that they donated their time for free. So we had two, and they were so different. Like that's what I can't wait to talk about is how different they were, and
I
yet
know.
how we got to relate to both. So we had early on in the week, the guy on the bottom there was Rick Green, and man, I love this guy. Like if you haven't seen this interview, go check it out on our YouTube. It's also here on our Facebook page, because here's a guy who's a national radio host. He's a national speaker. He's doing
Mhm.
all kinds of great things, teaching kids how to use firearms appropriately and safely to be able to protect themselves. That's like a lifelong skill, right? I've had some training and stuff like that that has really helped me, be more confident without own a firearm and protect my family if I ever need to. So he teaches kids that whole thing, and then he also teaches them like how the Constitution actually matters for your life. So what are your rights according to the Constitution, and what can you do? Like if someone is breaking down your door, trying to steal something from your house, what are you entitled to be able to do based on the Constitution, as well as all the other rights? He goes through them and just kind of teaching that civic responsibility that,
Mhm.
I think should be in schools, but I just don't know if it is as much as it should be these days. And Rick Green is helping with that. So we had a blast, man. We are talking about, just some places that we knew in common, some beliefs that we had in common. We talked about the American founders. We talked about his class.
Yeah.
Like,
I
it,
was shocked by all the ground that you covered in like just like less than like 30 minutes.
mhm.
I'm kind of with some of the commenters of like, man, you should let that go for an hour. Like, especially when we got them on. Like, next time, let's go for an hour and a half because there is so much ground to cover. I was thinking about, walking away from the interview that you had with Rick, just about how much linking your personal experience
Yeah,
with the Constitution, with your political views is just so important. And sometimes school just does not do that. I mean, he was even talking about how he was raised around guns. He had been around them all his life. But like when push comes to shove, when he was actually in an exercise where he needed to act, like he froze. And that's
yeah,
because he didn't have the training that was needed. But yeah, it was just, causing me to think about what are some of the personal experiences that I've had that have gotten me more politically conscious, maybe about my rights or about what rights are. I was thinking about just the group that you had created over at UVA. The
yeah,
Burke Society was when you had invited me on. That was something that, I mean, we surrounded it with food, with presentations, with laughter, with drinking and smoking and jokes, and it was a fun gig that just made it real for us. And we would talk about anything and everything about politics as we wanted to. And that's what made it real for me. So, I mean, I think when you have that personal experience linking towards, your, say, political views or ideologies, it helps make it real. And I got to commend Rick for doing that. The other thing that I was really fascinated with was just how much responsibility he was just trying to emphasize that is on the local community. And I thought that was
Yeah.
very Burkean as well, and even George Wills, that we'll get to later on, talks about this, but this evolution of the social consciousness or the social connection. And it's caused me to think, rethink just this week about, what do I teach my kids? What do I, in this time where I'm hoping that virtual learning is going to solve so much of the problems of my daughter's education, it's just not. It's not going to help socialize her. It's not going to help her talk about the deeper issues that she needs to know about. And I'm beginning to rethink about my own parenting style of how to help her make sense of the coronavirus, because I don't want to trust the school to do that. I just can't.
Yeah.
So all those things about the interview just made me think about, just get real reflective all of a sudden. I like that.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is, we can vote, and we just had a primary down here in Florida, and, we voted in that, my wife and I went. And then, of course, we've got the election coming up in November. We're going to vote for that, and that's absolutely important. And like we talk about Trump versus Biden and who you're going to vote for, and like to me, it's kind of an easy choice. But that's an important piece of what we do. But that's just one of many rights afforded to us by the Constitution. What about the
Right.
right to bear arms? What about the right to free speech? What about like it goes through it, and are we actually like taking advantage of all of those rights and using them appropriately? Because if you do have like firearm safety, like that's awesome, because then you can actually use that Second Amendment right appropriately, as opposed to if you never have that, if you're not prepared to defend your home or your property, like then you get in that situation, that right didn't really help you all that much, so and then Rick always talks about, in the current times we live in. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but there's been videos out of Portland of like all the protests and the fighting and things like that. So being able to handle yourself, is important, and to be smart on the actual truth of, what are we actually given in this country, and being able to take advantage of that. So that was
Absolutely.
one. And then the second one was George Will, which was, man, this was challenging, because you look at like doing Rick Green interview. We're both Christians, both Republicans, like all that, and then you have George Will, who is, he's an atheist, so not a Christian, obviously.
Right.
He's
Right.
already like denounced not only Trump but the entire Republican Party. Like he considers himself an independent, and I read his book. It was like 600 pages, and there are definitely some disagreements. Like when we talk about like Edmund Burke, the person we name our channel after, he's got kind of a mixed reaction to him. Some things he's good, some things he's not. So I was like super nervous, like, this is interesting. What are we going to talk about? And but at the same time, I'm like, okay, how can we, have focus on some of the things that we do agree on, and then have an exchange back and forth, even though we're both aware, of some of those disagreements, and kind of pull on that a little bit. So I was thrilled that, when we talked about Edmund Burke, he actually had some good things to say. He talked about him as the bridge between European conservatism and American conservatism. So that was helpful. And ultimately it was the same thing. We talked about the Constitution, and we talked about what it meant and the thought that went into it. And we talked about how we're against those who are progressive or socialist or what have you, that would be trying to tear it down.
Yeah.
So, like it was awesome. And I got to show you this. So you can see that image. That's me and him talking there on the top.
Nice.
And then this was him on MSNBC like 2 days earlier. So earlier in the weekly day it was, and it's like it's the same background, right? Like that's in his office and stuff. So it's cool that he was doing that national level interview, and then he took time for us. So it's just cool to reflect on how far we've come as a project, and how much fun this is to talk to people across the spectrum.
I saw like halfway through, like when he brought up Edmund Burke, and like I could like sense like there was a little bit of tension, and he's like, he started talking about him pretty favorably, when it came to like talking about again the evolution of like just the local society and trusting local society to be creative. And you were just like, whoo,
Yeah. Oh, it's like
that's good. Thanks for saying that. But I thought that was pretty fascinating with your conversation with George, because he was talking about how crucial it is to maintain the permanency of your view of human nature and the concept of it. It is not something that is just adapts to the times because all of a sudden government will seize that and they'll make their own narrative and produce whoever they want, and all of a sudden you have something closer towards totalitarianism. So the fact that he was, even from an atheist standpoint, in our perspective, touching upon the image of God language was just really fascinating to see that an atheist can get to acknowledge that same thing that, in his mind, religion is good for maintaining that moral order, answering probably some of the deeper questions that we need to try and answer in order to move forward. Like, where have we come from? Where are we going? What are the problems that we're facing and how do we fix them? Like, religion helps to answer that. But I am also fascinated with his fascination that as America grows more secular, then, well, this will be interesting to see. How does it hold up now that, we're not standing on the leg of scriptures
Yeah.
to hold up our ethics and our morality. So from his perspective, it's more of a, let's see how this experiment goes. Whereas, say some other Christians in our circle are a little more like, oh my gosh, the world's ending, which he even defeats as well as just saying, like, if you think that was like every election, every presidential election is always the world's going to end if we don't get our candidate elected. And I'm happy to see that he's just saying, listen, we are playing the long game here. America is robust. It's been around for a bit. The institutions are strong. So I like that encouraging language coming from him and also coming from a conservative.
Yeah, I mean, it basically shows you, because like, while there's certain things that I disagree with George Will about, I
Of
appreciate
course. Yeah.
as an atheist, he can work his way towards conservatism. And he does it through that whole appreciation of human nature, right? If human nature is a mix of good and bad, then we need to be conservative and hold on to our traditions, limit it. Constitution is a great way to do it. That's his argument. That's his argument
Yep.
for why atheists should be conservative. And I appreciate that. That's great. Like, if someone was an atheist, and we disagree on God, okay, we can talk about that. But if they don't want to, if they're kind of like convinced or whatever, then is that the end of our relationship? Well, maybe we don't agree on that, but we do agree on our politics, and we vote in a similar fashion, or we think about politics in a similar way. Like, that's something to be excited about. That's something that
Yeah.
we can say, hey, there's two different paths to this, and while I don't agree with how you got here, I appreciate that you got here, and that undercuts some of the opponents of conservatism, progressivism, liberals, socialist, all of this type of thing.
Mhm.
You can say, wait, hold on a second. So I get that you think of me as a Bible thumping, right winger or whatever. But what about George Will? Like, he's not. He's an atheist. And all this stuff.
Kind of flies in the face of like Russell Kirk. I mean, I know we're doing that in the book club, but like the first, the objectives that he lays out is you got to believe in this objective, almost divine entity or order that governs everything. And it's like, yeah, but I see people who are conservative who don't believe in that. So,
Yeah,
and I got to give them the benefit of a doubt. They've thought this through. So maybe I should talk to them and
yeah.
not ostracize them out.
No, that to me, that's Russell Kirk's particular conservatism. That's how he got there. Like, great for you, and I actually agree with him in many ways. However, let's not exclude people, and give this long list of you have to do all of these things to be a
Yeah.
conservative. You have to think exactly the way that I do on a 27 item list or whatever to be a conservative. Instead, let's just focus on, oh, you want to protect, the history and the good things that have made this country get to where it's at. Sweet, let's do that together. And as long as we have some
What?
agreement about what those are, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the founding principles, then, like, I'm sold. Like, let's work together, and then maybe, if you want to come to church anytime, you're welcome.
Right, right, exactly. Well, Wes, one of my best friends, even to this day, is an atheist.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't agree on, the existence of God, but I mean, my friendship with him has been one of the most rewarding over this past 7 years, and it's because of the conversations that we had, and it's because of the open-mindedness,
Yeah.
that we have had. I mean, I think our first conversation started out with, what would it take for you to stop being a Christian? And I was like, well, if you could produce the body of Jesus, then I guess that would do it for me, And like I was like, what would it take for you to stop being an atheist or to believe that God exists? And that's where the conversation started, and it's been amazing ever since. So, I mean, I got to hand it to George, from saying like, life is boring if you spend all the time being like, yep, yep, everything's great. Everything's good between us. Like we agree on absolutely everything. Even in our shows, Wes, you can look back and see where we've disagreed.
Yep.
And that's totally okay. That's
Yeah.
totally okay.
And that leads me to our next interview that we're going to have coming up. So we're going to have these guys on, the guys who wrote the book Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a search for common ground. Can't wait. I've been talking to both of these guys for the past couple of weeks. So Jordan Blyshek and then Christopher Haw are two writers who came together. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. Jordan's a Republican. Christopher is a Democrat. And they wrote this book together. They traveled the country for 3 years trying to understand the partisan divide. What do people believe out west? What do they believe down south versus what do they believe in the Northeast? What experiences have we had? They went to like Trump rallies. They went to like Bernie rallies. They did all of this stuff, going to these different, political venues, as well as just experiencing what they call America's civic religion, like what brings us together. And do we really hate each other as much as maybe it seems like on social media? And is there ways, to kind of rectify some of those divides and agree on some things? So really fascinating. I'm going to try to have both of them on as far as an interview this week. And then we're going to be giving away a copy of this book signed by Jordan, which is awesome. So yeah, I'm going to announce that tomorrow. People are going to be able to sign up for our newsletter, and then you can get a free copy of Union. We'll pick one winner and announce it on this show a week from now. So I'm pretty excited about that one. So we got more interviews coming.
Sounds good.
George Will was awesome. Rick Green was awesome. Yuval Levin we did last month. So you can kind of see like we're getting a chance to talk to people from very different viewpoints. And there's more of that coming. So really excited about the future.
Absolutely.
Let's get to a few comments. So, I looked through all the comments that came through from the George Will interview, and I want to respond to them directly because sometimes people really have like these substantive feedback for the interview, and I want to write them like an essay, like on Facebook. But then I'm like, wait a minute, on Sunday, and then we can do it together, John. So Archer wrote like one of the best comments that I've seen. And so he praised us for like the interview prep, right? I gotta love that because he talked about being prepared and knowledgeable, and that just comes from you and me, the other board members talking and making this interview happen. He made a distinction between us versus the mainstream media, which I also appreciate because we're trying to have some substance in what we do and still make it entertaining. I don't want to bore you to death. And then he talked about I cannot hold that against the host in terms of being friendly. We talked about that, right? But he said, I still have concerns about Mr. Will benefiting off of a national agenda that has worked against the regular American. We're talking about the left and Democrats and all that. His friend William F. Buckley in the National Review helped usher in an aristocratic brand of conservatism that ultimately became co-opted by corporate America, which has in turn led to economic catastrophe. So he's also talking about like the rise of conservatism and how corporate it's become. And I think we see that like now you get Donald Trump and his entire family, like are very much involved in the conservative movement, whereas they weren't before. They know how to brand stuff. They know how to keep the cameras rolling, and they know how to profit off of it. And they're doing that. Now conservatism is this, merchandise, right? Like living in Florida, I mean, not only is it a campaign, season, but we see like all these stores popping up that are selling like Trump memorabilia, right? So they're campaigning, but they're also like selling it and trying to make a profit off of it. And so you kind of see that corporatism is a part of conservatism. Now, part of politics, really, because the left is doing it. Democrats are doing it too. So answer that one first, and then we'll get to his other comments. So what are your thoughts on that?
First off, it's a heavy issue. I mean, I think that the commenter is very, very just in being able to, and very astute to point that out. Now, is it, William F. Buckley that actually paved the way for that? I think William Buckley was actually draining the swamp in and of himself, like through the National Review and, through the firing line that ran for, I think, 35 years or so. Like he wasn't afraid to call out people when he needed to, but he was really trying to bridge the gap and trying to make conversation. But he would call out, Ayn Rand libertarians, who were diehard Ayn Rand. He would just be like, no, just get that out of my face. Racism, anti-Semitism, like he kind of called it his job to denounce the bigots in conservatism. And I think that's probably needed today. We need another person kind of like Buckley to call that out. My opinion is that obviously human nature has fallen, right? And when you think about that, it means that the party needs to be able to go through that series of, okay, we need to re-examine ourselves and see Where have we fallen short? We need to acknowledge that and then start draining that out. I look at people like, we had talked about Herman Cain,
Mhm.
um, similar to Trump in that he was a businessman, but totally went a different route in his optimism, in his cheerfulness, in his campaign. It was nothing like Trump's in that way, but it was with the focus of, the common good, establishing a sound, through sound moral ethics.
Yeah.
And I think that whatever answer that we have to trying to take back conservatism, from corporate America that has obviously, become secularized, doesn't have. We knew that Trump was not a moral man going into the election, of course. But whatever we do going forward, it needs to be done with sound ethics. It needs to be done with a moral order that's established, whether that's through trying to go through education like you did, Wes, with the Burke Society and starting at the grassroots level, or something more. But you're right. I mean, the commenter is right in that that's what we see conservatism today. It's just been taken over. Like you said, it's a class war, culture war, and we're willing to trust whoever is going to sell their ticket, to us and stand for us. And that's what's unfortunate here. I think William Buckley would be rolling over in his grave to see this.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things. The first one is, I mean, there are concerns of excess on both sides, right? Because on the left, and even with some Republicans, there is this concern about big government, about government being too powerful, spending too much. I mean, we see
Mhm.
today like just enormous amounts of deficit spending and just the power that it can have over people's lives. And we see that with the COVID restrictions, So there's
Yeah.
this concern about that, but there's similar concerns, I would say, for big monopolistic corporations. And you look at that with like Facebook and Twitter, the power that they have to influence elections. I was looking at a video of Ted Cruz in the Senate, and he was interviewing this guy who was talking about Google, and he was talking about how Google and Facebook can have a direct effect on the elections. If they put out a post, then and they remind everybody, all their users, to vote, then they know that they're going to get more,
Mhm.
and they're going to change the election. And they could do that, and they could just give it to Democrats, or they could just give it to Republicans. Who's to tell them you have to do that, regardless of political affiliation? So they could literally, change an outcome through Facebook or Twitter if they wanted to. They have that kind of power, which is terrifying, right? And so these big companies that we all use, whether it's Apple or Microsoft or Facebook, I mean, just massive corporations that have enormous influence over our lives. We have to be suspicious of that. We have to think critically, and we have to make sure that we're not just buying everything that they're selling hook, line, and sinker, right? So there's in
Yeah.
both cases there is this concern over like huge amounts of power over people's lives, and as conservatives, you can look through history and you can see that power being abused in any like number of ways in multiple different countries. And so, human
Yeah.
beings having that power over other human beings is always to some extent dangerous. And of course, that leads me back to the Constitution and the stuff that we talked about with George Will, the stuff that we talked about with Rick Green. Is the Constitution is supposed to say, wait a minute, no, the individuals should have some responsibility. Rick Green and I talked about that. Is that
Yep.
our rights really don't mean a whole lot if you don't actually exercise them and become a responsible citizen yourself. And that's
Yeah.
what we need to look as opposed to salvation from any candidate. And that's honestly, John, why I didn't talk that much about Trump in either interview or Biden for that matter, because there's enough of that already out there today. And I want to focus on what can we do in our lives. Sure, vote. I hope you do it. Please do it. But also, learn how to be an individual who can take advantage of your rights, who can handle yourself, and exercise them fully. Because then it's going to be a lot harder for someone to have such power over you, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I'm gonna just jump in here real quick too, because like you said, I mean, so much of America is run by social media,
Yeah.
news media outlets, banks, financial institutions, big tech, like all the engineering firms. So many things are run by just a few companies, right? Things that are too big to fail. And that's why I was so relieved to like listen to Rick Green start talking about the intentionality that's needed in families. Wes, you were talking about making a plan when if COVID ever struck your family.
Yeah.
Like we are having to get creative and make plans with our families and our friends' families to work out education, methods because we know that we got to start rethinking how much responsibility the family has in taking over our kids' education. And maybe that's not so much of a bad thing. I mean, I was thinking about, I was thinking about the Patriot, where the kid is learning how to shoot,
Yeah,
and then he has to start shooting redcoats, right?
yeah,
And he's like saying, "Aim small, miss small." It's because his dad taught him how to do that. Like all of a sudden, all these things that we have trusted education to really teach our kids, we need to take ownership of that again. We need to start learning how we can begin to not see that as my life isn't going to go back to normal.
but
Damn, like as opposed to be, I get to spend more time with my family than ever before. In what ways can I be intentional about that? And I think again, that's a very Burkean way of being creative with the liberties that you have and learning about the liberties you have and why they are. Wes, we were working at the sailing center years back, and I'll never forget, there was a 10-year-old who was walking by with his dad, and he was criticizing the Constitution because it was an old document. And all the dad could say was like, well, it was written by it was written 100 years ago or, 300 years ago. I don't even know which, and like the kid could just did not have a good reason as to why he needed to value this page, even though he was coming from like a
yeah,
pretty decent school. So yeah, I think again,
yeah,
it's all about taking that ownership and wondering, okay, the government can't answer this question for me. The institution might not even be able to answer this question for me. In what way can we become, what Burke valued was judgment,
yeah.
your own judgment. Even if you're talking about democracy, he would say it's all in the lawmakers to think about their judgment. But sometimes, you've got to focus on your own here in your own family. You are the one who's laying down the law, and like you got to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like as you interact with people that are different, you can get to that point where you can defend what you believe that much better, right? Like
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from, as much as possible, and then you can say, okay, given that fact, let me respond to that, and let me figure out some arguments that, help me flesh through what I'm doing and respond to that criticism in a substantive way. That way, if you ever encounter them with someone else, you'll be able to explain, this is why I believe. And yes, I've heard your argument against it, and here are the responses. So you become more solid in what you believe, not necessarily like losing it all. So let me get to Burke. You mentioned Burke in a Burkean way of thinking. So he talks. The commenter Archer, he said, Edmund Burke comes off to me in a nutshell as a fancy man, fancy words, a royalist at heart who doesn't fully trust the common man. And he kind of goes on to explain that in a few more sentences. And then he talks about where we exist are greedy, kind of links him to that a little bit, and there's no sense of nobleness today, money in the pursuit of the consumed, in the noble mind. So he talks about Burke being a fancy guy, and my response to that too is Burke disavowed aristocracy. He talked about that in
Mhm.
several of his speeches, and I've got some great quotes on that. And I thought about throwing that quote down in response to this, but I kind of want to respond to that more substantively than that and explain why that is. Not only did he disavow aristocracy, he hated it. He hated the notion of people looking down on others. And some evidence for that is that he truly cared about those who were in poverty, who were less fortunate,
Yes.
a great personal sacrifice. I mean, people say that he hated the French, and it's just not true because he adopted French orphans who were running from the Reign
Mhm.
of Terror. He clearly cared about these people. He just hated what what the revolutionaries were doing and all the death. He was a
Yeah.
huge advocate for the Indians who were being oppressed by the East India Trading Company, and he argued forcefully against Warren Hastings. He was a mentor of William Wilberforce, trying to get rid of the slave trade. Right.
Hmm.
So I mean, just all these different things that were very unaristocratic in the sense that he was finding commonality with not only the common man, but the oppressed man. The guy who had nothing. So here's like Edmund Burke was a guy who really cared
Yeah.
about all people, and you see that through the actions, not just the quotes, but the actions of his life. What I would say though is to defend Archer's comment a little bit is Edmund Burke was not in favor of like pure democracy. He
Exactly.
believed
That's what I was going to say. Yes.
he believed in representative government, and so did James Madison. Frankly, and I think that's where George Will and I found some common ground. Is James Madison said, "Look, it's not that we're going for no government, and it's not that we're going for pure democracy. Is we want representatives from the local level to be selected, and we want the public will to be filtered in through them, so that they are
Hmm.
advocates. So these people can go back to work and do what they need to do, and then these representatives can deliver what's coming down from the federal government, and they can be a check on it. So they were trying to blend different forms of government, democracy, aristocracy, and
Mhm.
authority, like, in a sovereign and
That
president. So
that's what makes Burke just so fascinating is that you'll read a few quotes by him say like you can easily make a case that Burke hated the common man, right? Because he criticized democracy. He thought they were too mutable, right? That their whims would end up electing some type of demagogue over them, and all those sort of things. And as soon as you think that, you can turn right on over and look around, and all of a sudden you're finding that he is challenging the aristocracy. He's calling them out on it, laying his career on the line for it. And he actually believes that if you want the minorities to be better represented, it's through trusting the aristocracy to defend them. They have the resources and the means there, and the great power. They have the responsibility to care for these people who have a great need. So that's I think what's super fascinating about Burke is that as soon as you think you've got him pinned down, you've got to keep on reading because you'll find that the guy was a lot more complicated than we might give him credit for.
yeah,
Now, but yeah, that is to say the comment does have some weight to bear on it even today.
yeah, I'm not a fan of the word aristocracy, but I am a big fan of the word responsibility, which is what we've been talking about. With the minute that you start to like train yourself on the Constitution, the minute that you start to, know how to handle a firearm well, right? You start to be someone who exercises your rights. You start to set yourself apart from a lot of people that don't. That makes you a leader. I don't think that makes you an aristocrat, but it does set you apart, and it can set you on that path. You get a solid education, those type of things. You start to be able to express ideas. You pay attention to what's going on. Become intentional with those things. Then you really start to set yourself apart, and then we can get to a point where, you're an aristocrat. But really, I think what he's against is elitism, which is looking down on people. Being like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
better than you because of, and that's the exact wrong attitude. And what you get from Burke, and we talked about this in the Yuval Levin interview, is you get a sense of humility. And when aristocrats or leaders or whatever you want to call them lose that sense of humility and they lose that connection, then it's truly dangerous because it leads to that, power that we talked about and the danger of it being, wielded against people. So I don't, we obviously kind of fleshed out where we see Burke on that. But let's get to a couple other comments. So
Okay.
these are pretty quick. So Christopher Souza, a guy we've had, on the show a bunch of times, said my only complaint, talking about the George Will interview, is that it was way too short. So I'll
Yeah.
thank you. Keep it concise. And because people only have so much time. But yeah, I would love to interview him again. Maybe like next year.
Small steps. Hey, small steps. Don't worry.
Yeah.
There will be others.
Uh, I mean, he spent more time on our show than he did on MSNBC. So there you go. Christopher also said, I found his distinction between European and American style conservatism fascinating. So yeah, we talked about that before. Is this notion that there is differences, but the key point is that Burke bridges that gap. And if you look at our logo, I mean, it's right here on the screen
Mhm.
and behind me on our poster. Is you see Burke and he's got the American flag on one side and he's got the British flag on the other,
Yeah.
bridging that gap. So I was like, yes, like that's why I made the point. So that's exactly it. Is that he shows you that conservatism is not isolated to America alone, and that there is some commonality with different beliefs.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was.
Absolutely.
Philip Daniels said, "I agree with Will about tribalism." So we talked about that. We talked about the notion that like, hey, my tribe has it all figured out, and everyone else is stupid. Like, oh, I'm I define conservatism this way, and I'm not going to let you be a part of it. Philip says it is boring and it keeps us from growth, and I think we fleshed that out tonight pretty.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
Well, then our last one is Ericus, who says, "Get him on again. Get George Will on again. We want to know other stuff, like how he feels about government regulation of new tech, like Uber, and how he feels about mandatory vaccines." And then I think I was asking him about like how's he feel about baseball, like and being canceled at the Ivies, which
We need we need a bad comment in there. We need to be able to like roast a bad comment.
there wasn't, there was a lot of skepticism from folks who were
Certainly
like,
was.
have
Oh yeah.
show, but then when people actually watched the interview, I think that they enjoyed it, and they like kind of understood where we were coming from because, people are so, focused on this election that it's like there's nothing else going on, right? But there is, life continues, and whether it's Trump or Biden, we're still going to be around after
Mhm.
that election happens, and like it could be a seismic change, or it could be a continuation of Trump, and the liberals are all upset about it. But either way, these deeper issues of human nature, of corporatism, of deficit spending, all the things that we've talked about tonight, of elitism versus responsibility, all those things are still going to be present. We're still going to be humans at the end of the day. We're still going to have, like you said, our kids are still going to need their parents. They're going to need education.
Mhm.
They're going to need role models. All of those things are going to exist. Like Trump is not going to take that burden from you. Neither
Yeah.
is Biden. You're still going to have to do that all the same, regardless of who's in the White House, right? And
Absolutely.
like Kyle said it really well on our show, Refounding Fathers, as he said, we have to get away from this notion that national politics is the answer for everything. It's the answer. It can be the answer for some things. What do we do in times of war? Who's going to hunt down ISIS? What are we going to do about X, Y, and Z in terms of like political decisions? But it's not the answer for the deeper questions of our life. And
Yeah.
got to wrestle with on our own. So anyway, that's all I got for tonight, man. Any closing comments?
I mean, it's not exactly Burkean, but just to kind of get people into the mindset of thinking for yourself, of going out on a journey where you can take ownership of what you're processing about your own life and about your own views. I really encourage people to look at the American Transcendentals, not for their political views per se, but I'm talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson and his self-reliance. I'm talking about Henry David Thoreau and Walden. I mean, these people who went off the grid. They basically had a distrust of a lot of the big institutions, including the church, that were running things, and they wanted to go out and actually look in themselves and just start thinking about what drives them, what motivations do they have, what matters to them, and then re-enter into society and start making those connections. Now, again, always take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I don't always approve of their political views, but I do approve of their fact that they were willing to go and take ownership of their own views with complete and utter intentionality. And so, if anyone is into literature who's watching, certainly look at the American Transcendentals movement and Emily Dickinson as well. I definitely want to put her in there with her poetry.
Yeah.
But try that out because that is something that will definitely provoke some intentionality and challenge you.
Yeah, and Wendell Berry's one conservative who
Exactly. Yeah.
off the grid and kind of did his own thing and has some really unique ideas. So lots more to talk about. Lots of great ideas to flesh out with the
I'm gonna need to bring 2 beers next time.
So again, here's a copy of Union. We're gonna interview these guys this week. So if you're interested in that, definitely sign up for our newsletter. We're going to start that contest tomorrow. If you've got any more feedback for the George Will interview, anything I should have asked or could have done better, let me know. Same thing for the Rick Green. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, obviously. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next Sunday. Bye, John.